I'm Dr. Julie Robinson. I'm the NASA Chief Scientist for the International Space Station at Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, in the United States.
And I'm Angie Boyd, and I'm an International Space Station Flight Controller at the European Astronaut Center near Cologne in Germany.
Angie and I are happy to welcome you to this special panel at the IAC 2015 here in Jerusalem. The ISS is a unique scientific platform that has existed since 1998 and has enabled thousands of researchers in over 80 countries to conduct breakthrough research. Even before it was habitable, research began on the only orbiting laboratory of its kind. Since November 2nd, 2000, the ISS has maintained a continuous human presence in space. And in 2011, when the US segment of the ISS assembly was complete, the focus shifted to fully utilizing the lab for continued scientific research, technology development, space exploration, commerce, and education.
All right, and we have the great pleasure of introducing you to 6 young professionals from around the world who are or have been continuing to conduct research on this multicultural interdisciplinary laboratory. The science and technology is diverse, and it reflects the international spirit of the ISS. Research payloads arrive on a fleet of multinational vehicles tended by an international crew of astronauts and cosmonauts, bridging national as well as cultural boundaries. Our panelists are all involved in projects aimed at benefiting humankind by pushing forward the boundaries of our knowledge. They've been selected from a YouTube competition, which was run earlier this year, and there was a number of great applications by young professionals who are all doing work on the International Space Station.
Our speakers were chosen not only for their research, but they were also selected for their spirit of cooperation and scientific and technological drive that unite the people involved in ISS, regardless of their professional or cultural background. But before we meet them, let's enjoy a short video that they prepared for us.
I'm Shimada from ISS Payload Engineering at JAXA.
Hi, I'm Jean-Dominique, System Engineer for Columbus, the European module on the ISS.
Hi, my name's Norah, and I work as the Communications Manager at the Irish Centre for Composites Research.
Hi, my name is Luis Sia. I'm a Research Associate at Biosphere Space Technologies.
My name is Jason Dunn. I'm the co-founder and Chief Technology Officer at a company called Made in Space.
Julia Stalder, and I'm a mechanical engineer on the ISS Rapid Scat team.
The overarching goal is to select the effective material and appropriate wall thickness of interplanetary spacecrafts and habitat modules such as moon base. So in short, the measurement of space radiation certainly enables us to take a steady step toward human space exploration beyond the low Earth orbit.
I am the technical gatekeeper for anyone willing to run a project on the Columbus module. I enable the integration of experiments with groundbreaking science impacts on topics such as Earth observation and monitoring, skin aging research, and future planetary exploration.
I recently coordinated a NanoRacks project in Ireland, where for the first time, Irish secondary school students had the opportunity to send their research to space. Hundreds of students from around Ireland got involved in the project, and the winning experiment made history in July 2014 when it launched to the International Space Station.
Hi, my name is Luis Sia. I'm a research associate at Biosource Space Technologies. I investigate bacterial behavior in space. My PhD thesis conducted on board the International Space Station allowed us to investigate how are bacteria capable of surviving in concentrations of drugs that on Earth would kill them, but also how can we translate this new knowledge into solutions to the drug resistance problem here on Earth.
And last year, we made history when we put a 3D printer on the International Space Station. It allows ISS really to be a gateway for humankind's future in space. We can give this technology to anyone to use as a new way to access space.
My primary role on the team was to lead the mechanical assembly and testing of the instrument prior to its launch and operation. RapidScat is a scatterometer, which is a type of radar. RapidScat specifically measures the wind speed and direction at the surface of the ocean. It does this by measuring how much of the radar signal scatters when it impinges on the ocean's surface.
So before the panelists come on stage, as has been done in other plenaries, you'll see people on the aisles with papers that you can write a question on. We'll be having time at the end. You may see them waving some paper if it's not too dark out there. And please do give your questions to our panelists throughout the course of their early discussions, and then we'll have plenty of time at the end to take those questions. Let's see, I think, Angie, we're ready to bring our panelists up on stage.
Let's do it. All right, so let's welcome our panelists to the stage. So, Jun Shimada and Lucia, Norah Patten, Julia Stalder, Jean-Dominique Coste, and Jason Dunn.
So let us begin with Jun Shimada. Jun is a systems engineer at JAXA. He's studying the radiation environment in low Earth orbit. Also, he's leading the Earth Observation Camera Project. Jun, tell us a little bit more about yourself and your work.
Thanks, Julie. First of all, it's my great honor to be here sharing the story with all of you. Thank you so much for making this happen. I want to start sharing the idea of space radiation measurement. When you think about the future space exploration, we have to deal with the fatal dose of radiation. The first step to tackle this challenge is to understand where we stand. Our agency already has a simulation model for radiation risk assessment, but the problem is we've never done the actual measurement on the GEM-Expo facility. Next slide, please. So we installed passive dosimeters, radiation detectors, onto the tip of GEM robotic arm, as shown in this picture. This mission is called Free Space Padres mission, and we performed this experiment last June for 2 weeks in order to get the data to update the simulation model. The overarching goal of the mission is to select the shielding material and to appropriately design the wall thickness of spacecrafts and habitat modules such as moon base. With that, we can effectively minimize the radiation exposure risk. Let's move on to the next item, Earth observation. I'm a team leader of the camera missions on the Japanese experiment module. And back in 2012, we installed a camera system on the GEM-Expo facility. The concept of the mission is COTS utilization. By that, I mean the system includes several consumer products, such as camera, which you can find at the appliance store. This sort of application makes it possible to develop a new system more economically and faster, because we don't really need to start from scratch. However, the environment is severe enough for these Coste components. So the criteria for selection is based on the actual environment on orbit. Based on that, we performed various kinds of tests on the ground, including vacuum, thermal, radiation tests, and vibration tests as well. As an achievement, the current system on orbit has been operated for 3 years with no major troubles. The video images are used for education and publicity, including a live broadcast weekly on the internet. And importantly, the camera system on orbit was registered to the International Disaster Charter, and when we got a request, the emergency observation would be performed as soon as possible. We are now designing a new camera system which has 2 remarkable features. Firstly, to smoothly track the targets on the ground, and secondly, shoot the night view. The new system is planned to be launched within a year, so I hope you have a chance to see what's on the screen. I strongly believe that the images from space can make you realize again we share this planet. So my hope is our mission could raise such awareness and ultimately about the importance of nature preservation and peace. Those are the major descriptions of what drives me to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you. And how does an organization or a country that's not involved in the ISS request data through this program?
Well, basically, anybody can make a request. Once you got registered to the disaster charter, you're good to go. And the request is also made by a group called Sentinel Asia, which is a disaster management support system in the Asia-Pacific region. Thanks for the question.
Thank you very much, Jun. So yeah, the ISS can definitely bring benefits to people on Earth in an efficient and a timely fashion. And long-term solutions to problems on Earth are also addressed in longer-term research projects. And for this, we'd like to welcome Dr. Luis Zia from Guatemala and the United States, who works on a great example of such a project. He's investigating bacterial behavior in space from BioServe in Boulder, Colorado. And Luis, why would we investigate bacteria on board the ISS?
Thank you, Angie. The relevance of this kind of research comes from the impact it can have in all of our lives, the lives of our children, and the next generations. Every 6 minutes, someone is dying from a bacterial infection that we can no longer cure with our existing antibiotics. And this problem is just getting worse every year as more bacterial strains are acquiring resistance. But here we are at the International Astronautical Congress, so the question is, what does this have to do with space? And in space, we have seen that bacteria behave differently. For example, in the top image in this slide, you can see a test tube with billions of E. coli cells grown in a liquid medium here on Earth. The bottom image is a picture I took as soon as a test tube came back from space, and you can see that cells tended to aggregate, almost behaving like a single entity instead of the billions of cells it was composed of. Another thing we have seen in space is that you need more drugs to kill bacteria. So this seems like a lot of problems for human space exploration, but it could also be an opportunity for us to find a solution against the drug resistance problem here on Earth. So there are 2 questions. One is, how are bacteria capable of surviving in concentrations of drugs that on Earth would kill them? And the second question is, can we identify the specific genes that are responsible for giving bacteria this resistance? Because if we could, then we could make new drugs that would allow us to kill the bacteria that our current drugs can't. And that was the main question, actually a couple of questions from my PhD thesis, and an experiment conducted on board the International Space Station called Antibiotic Effectiveness in Space 1, or AES-1. In AES-1, what we did is we flew E. coli and different concentrations of different classes of antibiotics, and we tried to identify what was the concentration of drug that we needed to kill the bacteria, and also what were the genes that were being turned on and off during these processes. We flew several of those test tubes inside this hardware. This is called a group activation pack, or a GAP, developed by BioServe Space Technologies in Boulder, Colorado. And this allowed us to have a simplified approach to the experiment where the astronauts, all they would have to do is to insert a crank on top of the GAP and rotate it, and this would initiate the experiment, introduce the antibiotics, and eventually terminate the experiment. We found a lot of cool stuff during this experiment, but I'm going to tell you two things that we concluded. One is that cells in space were less than half the volume as the cells grown under identical conditions but on Earth. Similarly, we found the specific genes that are responsible for, or actually allow us to corroborate a theory that's been around for decades, but had not been able to be proved either through physical measurement techniques or computational modeling, and what this theory does, it describes bacterial behavior in space. And just as AES-1 is a humble step towards finding a novel solution against the drug resistance problem here on Earth, there are other experiments that are taking advantage of the microgravity environment, and more specifically of the International Space Station, to find solutions for all of us here. For example, we have helped in experiments for vaccine development, the development of drugs against osteoporosis, muscle dystrophy, and hepatitis C. And this is something that is not too well known, and when at least I get the question asked, why are we spending all this money on human space exploration or just going out there? And in reality, there's a lot of benefits that a lot of people don't know about. Just recently, I heard a girl very excited saying that Matt Damon just discovered water on Mars. And I think we're maybe not doing that great of a job in conveying this information. She had some right facts, but not the actual right statement. So that's one of the things I try to do here. I'm trying to explain these things, and you also know about the benefits of the microgravity environment and the ISS.
Thanks, Luis. That's fascinating. I think it's a great example of the ISS as a gateway to humankind's future, not only in space, but also back here on Earth. So what's next in your research?
I'm trying to continue that same kind of research, basic research on AES2, but also increase it to applied research. So I'm also trying to fly uropathogenic bacteria. This is the bacteria that can cause urinary tract infections, and this has happened in space as well as it's a big problem here on Earth. I don't know if anybody saw the movie Apollo 13, but for example, in that one case, an astronaut got a urinary tract infection because of stress, because of lack of water and other factors, and they gave him all the drugs that they had on board and they didn't work. So hopefully this kind of research would also help the human space exploration program, but also all of us here on Earth.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Understanding the complex ways the microgravity environment interacts with humans is still one of the key research topics that can be addressed aboard the ISS. Our next panelist is Dr. Norah Patten from Ireland. She's adjunct faculty at the International Space University and previously worked on as the Communications and Outreach Manager at the Irish Centre for Composites Research. Norah, how did you get involved with projects aboard the International Space Station?
Thank you very much. So I grew up in the west of Ireland and I fell in love with everything space related after a trip to NASA when I was just 11 years old. Ireland is a country that has no space agency, but after many years focused on my studies, obtaining my PhD and developing my own space career, I really wanted to bring something back to the younger generation at home. I began working as the Communications and Outreach Manager at the Irish Centre for Composites Research in 2013, and I wanted to do something a little different. So I created the Only Way Is Up project. For the first time, Irish second-level students would have an opportunity to send their research to the International Space Station. I raised the necessary funding through a number of different sources, including writing a successful grant application to the Irish government. We then signed an agreement with NanoRax, which would allow one experiment go to the International Space Station. We spoke to hundreds of bright young minds from all around Ireland about the importance of microgravity and the utilisation of the ISS. They had loads of different questions about space, research, life on Earth, and exploration. They began asking their teachers questions about space and why it is important. And then we allowed them the opportunity to research space-related topics for themselves and develop ideas of what they would like to send to the International Space Station. Over 140 students submitted abstracts, and then in February 2014, we announced the winner. The announcement of the winning project was featured on the Irish National News, in local and national newspapers, and also on various radio shows. There was huge excitement. The winning experiment investigates the effects of microgravity on reinforced concrete, and it was developed by 4 young students from Limerick. We spent several weeks preparing the experiment to be flight ready, and then we made history in July 2014 when we launched the experiment on the Orb-2 mission, the resupply mission to the ISS. It was very exciting, and the students and everyone involved were extremely happy. The experiment was then activated on board by ESA astronaut Alexander Gerst, and it spent almost 10 weeks on board before arriving back safely to Earth. So now, instead of asking why, I encourage all of us to ask why not. In a country that has no space agency, no astronauts, and a limited amount of space activity, I was able to reach hundreds of students and speak to them about the importance of space exploration. So I encourage you to think about your country and your community and ask yourself what you can do to further the advancement of the knowledge of space exploration. It's your turn.
Thank you, Norah. And what advice would you have for somebody wanting to do a similar project in their country?
I suppose my advice would be do not be afraid to take that first initial step, because although it's often the most difficult, it's sometimes the most important. And look to your community of people, look at the resources that are available to you through partnerships, through funding initiatives, and through your network here today. And one other important thing is to identify the schedule and the time commitment that's involved, both for you and for the schools and the teachers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norah. Yeah, for sure, asking the right questions is in many cases the first step in the right direction, and especially when engaging with younger students, it can definitely turn passion into enthusiasm and into projects. So our next panelist comes from the United States and is a mechanical engineer. Julia Stalder was involved in a project that utilizes the ISS for Earth observation, and it's one of the favorites to watch for the flight controllers on orbit. What is your project all about?
Thank you so much, Angie. So I'm really excited to be here today to tell you about my involvement on the ISS RapidScat team as a mechanical engineer on that project. So RapidScat is a scatterometer, which is a type of radar. RapidScat specifically measures the wind speed and direction at the surface of the ocean. It does this by measuring how much a radar signal scatters when it impinges on the ocean's surface. So if the wind speeds are low, the surface of the sea tends to be smooth, and the radar signal will simply bounce off the ocean away from the radar. On the other hand, if the wind speeds are fast, the surface of the ocean will be rougher, and that microwave signal will actually scatter in all directions, and the amount of returned energy to the radar will be higher. So that's the general premise for how the scatterometer works, and with this, we can produce these plots of global ocean wind vectors. The plot on the right is one of the first major storms that RapidScat observed. After just 2 days of being turned on the ISS, RapidScat collected this data of Tropical Storm Simon forming off the west coast of Mexico. A couple weeks after that, and a couple months after that, we were observing the large typhoons developing in the South Pacific, like Typhoon Hagaput that affected the Philippines last winter. And in recent months, we've been seeing the several hurricanes in the Atlantic and the North Pacific Ocean. So my specific role on the team was to lead the mechanical assembly and test of the instrument prior to its launch and operation. I got to deliver my own hardware and then take all the pieces and put them together and lead the team that did the mechanical assembly. Like for any spacecraft or thing being launched into space, we put it through extensive environmental tests, like vibration tests and thermal vacuum tests, to make sure that it would operate correctly once on orbit. So RapidScat was then launched to the ISS in September of 2014. It was launched in the unpressurized cargo trunk of the SpaceX Dragon vehicle on its 4th crew resupply servicing mission. After a few days, the Dragon docked with the station, and the robotic arm controlled by ground operators in the US, Canada, and Europe, extracted the payload, and installed it on the European Columbus module. It's really exciting to have gotten to attend the IAC and meet my colleague Jean-Dominique, who will speak in a moment, because he himself played a very specific and integral role in getting us installed safely and smoothly. So overall, RapidScat was a really exciting mission to be a part of. It was a very unique project, especially for being developed and managed at JPL. It's not something that we typically do. It's a little outside of the box. But it's really a point of pride that we get to look up at images of the station and the Columbus module and see RapidScat spinning there. I think it also is a prime example of how international collaborations can produce these very valuable instruments, not only for the scientific communities, but also in helping communities on Earth in the sense of preventing disasters. So, thank you.
You mentioned that these instruments are normally on unmanned satellites. So how did the ISS specifically enable the RapidScat mission?
So the ISS was fundamental to this project. If it weren't for the orbiting platform provided by the ISS, we would not have been able to develop and launch this instrument so quickly and be getting this data so quickly. So it not only provides the literal platform from which we operate, but the radar instrument is already so complex on its own. So we actually use the station as sort of our spacecraft bus. It provides the power to our instrument, and we use the telemetry links already built into the station to get this data. So if it weren't for this already built-in infrastructure, things would have taken a lot longer. And then in addition to that, from a scientific perspective, the non-sun synchronous orbit of the station actually lets us look at the same spot of the ocean at different hours of the day. So that allows the scientists to study the diurnal cycles of the winds.
Thank you so much, Julia.
Thank you.
Many projects benefit from the unique platform that the International Space Station provides. With so many experiments running in parallel, integration of these systems becomes a real challenge. Our next panelist is Jean-Dominique Coste. As systems engineer, he's involved in facilitating setting up new projects on board the International Space Station. Considering the high requirements that cutting-edge science projects often place on their laboratory environment and the people conducting the experiments, I'm excited to hear what he has to say. Jean-Dominique?
Yeah. Good afternoon. I am a system engineer. I represent the station when new projects want to fly up there. I make sure that they'll be technically feasible in the station and that they'll be ready to deliver outstanding science. I supervise the integration of about 30 projects, one of them being the fantastic RapidScat, as just presented by Miss Julia. And, but now, do we have any people sailing in the room, like any sailors in the audience? Yes, great. Well, if you ever plan to go tackle the waves on the Mediterranean Sea, you will look at weather data that probably comes from RapidScat. And it was not easy to get there, you know. So the kind of thing we are interested in as ISS integrator is this project had a really large antenna with a really strong radiation beam, like so strong that anything coming close to it, like astronauts or spacecrafts, will just get deep fried. So we had to come up with smart control systems to make sure that the beam could only be operated safe. And an example of such control is this little tiny jumper which an astronaut has to manually put in or out an outlet on the station. And it's, we program it so that it's independent from the main power control chain. So you always have a way to fall back in case of unsafe situation. Another example is that this project was a really big, bulky piece of metal that you attach on one end of the station, and it actually changed the center of gravity of the whole ISS. Wow. So what does it mean? If you have a Soyuz docking on the other end of the station, which is designed into another center of gravity, you will get a cascading vibration that could trigger a disconnect of one module. Crack. Like, you know the movie Gravity? We're not big fans of this kind of stuff, so we run a lot of analysis to try to make sure that the onboard operation would be fine. And you know, it's an interesting job because the pressure builds up until you actually get there on orbit. And you go at the launch, the rocket goes off, And everybody in the room is like, oh wow, congratulations. But I'm like, no guys, I'm like stressing my heart out until the thing is really up there, plugged in, and with sending friendly telemetry back down to Earth. But I can say that thanks to our work, the ISS is actually much safer than what Hollywood wants you to know. Another project that I really like is SkinBee. But before, let me ask my favorite question. Does anybody in the room want to become an astronaut? Oh, wow, that's so popular. Much more than my job. So I have bad news for you guys. You will actually look older in space. Your skin will age faster. But for us, it's good news, because then we can study the skin aging process. If you want to do that on Earth, you have to wait for somebody to get old, which takes like a while. So since in space it's faster, you can make a model of this aging process, and in the end, devise new treatments that could benefit your friends, your relatives. Isn't that nice? And you know, it's really the point of it all, that in the end, it all comes back to you. Everything I've talked about so far, these are just like boring tools which we maintain so that you, in the end, can benefit from, whether it's Earth observation or medicine. And in that direction of democratizing things, at Airbus DS in Bremen, we developed the multi-purpose computer communication, which will enable anyone to drive a project on a station from anywhere. So let's say you could be sitting at Starbucks with your nice caramel macchiato, because that's what you like, right? And from your laptop, you could drive a little robotic arm on the station. And that's the aim, and we think the station should really be yours.
All right, and as we can tell from your experience, one of the major barriers to access space is indeed this complexity. So is this driven by the nature of space engineering, or is there something that your team can do about it as the integrator?
That is a really good question. So initially, we worked with a really complex set of processes and requirements to try to cover up any kind of impossible failures. I mean, you know, in this room, you can easily use this smartphone, right? But up there in the station, its radiation could interfere with a lot of other equipment. But after years of operating the station, we found out that the low Earth orbit environment is actually very friendly. Like, you could almost walk off this room and fly there and be fine, almost. So then we worked hard to define new processes to make it as lean as possible to do science on the station. And what we aim for is that in the end, you would go to a shop, buy a commercial piece of hardware, like June did for his amazing project, and you would redesign as you wish, then do a really simple qualification campaign, only what makes sense for you. It will be as automated as possible. Then you would fly, attached to standard interfaces that could accommodate a large turnaround of payloads, and you would operate from your place. I think a lot of the people in this room own a piece of the station from their taxes, and it should be given back to you, you know? The ISS is not anymore this kind of elitist governmental pride thingy that people think it is. And when I say that, I think people smile, but for me, it's simply a platform which we work hard to maintain so that you, in the end, can benefit from as citizens. And that's my message. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jean-Dominique. And our next panelist represents the entrepreneurial spirit of the next generation. Jason Dunn is the co-founder and chief technology officer of Made in Space, and we're looking forward to what the cooperation between NASA and a startup has brought to the ISS and to space exploration.
Thank you, Angie. So I like to think that space exploration today is a lot like a camping trip. We bring everything we need with us, and if something goes wrong, we have to make an emergency fix with duct tape, or perhaps have a rocket sent up to us to bring the emergency resupply, or in the worst case, abort the mission and come back home. So 5 years ago, my colleagues and I asked the question, what if everything in space didn't have to come from the surface of the planet? What if, in fact, you could just build everything you need in space on demand when you need it? And that vision became the backbone of the company that we started called Made in Space, with the goal of enabling NASA and other space agencies to take astronauts beyond low Earth orbit, back to the moon, to the asteroids, and eventually Mars and beyond, by utilizing on-demand in-space manufacturing. We started working with NASA back 5 years ago directly to bring 3D printing technology to the International Space Station. 3D printing, if you don't know about it, it's a form of basically robotic manufacturing. And the first mission partnered between Made in Space and NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center was called the 3D Printing in Zero-G Experiment. The image of the device on the screen here is the actual payload that is on the space station today. It was launched on SpaceX 4 in September of 2014. And when 3D print went into operation in November of 2014, it began building the first parts that humanity has ever manufactured off planet Earth. And now to date, we've built about 24 different objects. It started pretty easy. The first part was essentially a flat plate, so not much three-dimensionality to it. We wanted it to be an easy print. Then we moved on to three-dimensional column, tensile coupons, eventually even a container with a lid on top, and then finally some tools. And the magical part about what we've been doing here is that the astronauts really they're a little bit hands-off in the way we operate. The printer is remotely operated from the ground between Made in Space and NASA. So to the astronauts, it's really this magic box in space where they go set it up, they put make sure there's a build plate and there's feedstock inside, and it's an empty box. And they leave, they go do their work, and when they come back a few hours later, there's something inside. And each time it's something different, and they never really know what will be printed next. So we had this excitement of watching them get excited to operate the payload with us. And that leads to one of my favorite stories of what we printed. We were down to the second to last print in the mission, and we printed a socket head. It's the head of a wrench. And when the commander of the station, Butch Wilmore, came by to remove the socket head, he said over the loop that he really wished he had his ratchet handy because he would try the socket head out. And as it turned out, he had misplaced his ratchet a few days prior to that. So in our debrief that morning with NASA, we talked about the idea of perhaps designing a ratchet that we could then have printed in space on the next print that we would do. And there were some requirements. The ratchet would have to have a leaf spring and gears. It would have to actually have ratcheting mechanism inside. It would have to be torque rated. And most importantly, no assembly required. The astronaut should be able to take it out of the printer and it should be ready to use. So the Made in Space team got to work that day. We designed a ratchet. We printed it several times on our ground unit 3D printer in the lab. And by the end of the day, we had one that worked. We overnighted it to NASA in Huntsville, Alabama, where the next day their safety team held the ratchet in their hand and started to assess if this could be actually uplinked to the space station. And keep in mind, what they're holding in their hand isn't actually the real part. And this would be the first time that would ever happen. They're holding a representation of what would eventually get printed in space. So fantastically, about 5 days later, NASA had qualified this design to be 3D printed in space. And this would also be the first time that we would uplink the actual digital file to the space station. Up until now, everything we had printed was already, the file was stored in the printer, and all we had to do was execute the print command. So NASA cleared us to print, and as the process goes, we start in the Made in Space Operations Center, where we take the digital file, it's essentially a blueprint of the ratchet that is the instruction file for the 3D printer. We send that to NASA at Houston, where they uplink it to the space station. It's uplinked and stored on a laptop computer, and you can see that in the foreground of this image. And once the file is stored on that computer, NASA gives commanding authority over to Made in Space to begin operating the print. So at that point, we take the file in our operations center and we send the command to move that file to the printer, and then we begin the print process. For the ratchet, it took about 2 hours, and then the part has been built inside the printer, and we have video telemetry, so we monitor the print the whole time. So we know it's finished, and NASA gives Butch a call and says, "Hey Butch, can you come over and remove the next part?" So here's an image of Butch removing the door from the printer. And keep in mind, the last time we heard from Butch was about 5 days before this image is taken, when he asked for a ratchet. He has no idea what would be inside. To him, it's just the magic box producing another part. And then my favorite picture is what I call Happy Butch. Here's Butch holding the ratchet. And you know, this picture is taken 2 hours after the digital file is sent to space. So 2 hours later, and Butch is holding in his hand a physical part. And that goes down in history as the fastest anything has ever been sent to space, especially the fastest anything has ever been put into an astronaut's hand after they had asked for it. And what's remarkable to me is that if Butch were on Mars, the story wouldn't really be all that different because we're transmitting physical hardware in a way by essentially the speed of light.
Jason, that's a great story about the ratchet.
Thank you.
And it definitely shows us how a future mission to the moon or Mars might get a tool that they didn't think to bring aboard. So what do you see as the future of Made in Space?
That's a good question. So we're doing something pretty interesting. This initial mission was really a technology demonstration. So Made in Space and NASA working really closely together to understand how 3D printing works in microgravity, how to design the process to work better. And now that we've built that foundation, Made in Space has gone out and built a commercial 3D printer. And that's, it's called the Additive Manufacturing Facility, and it's about to be launched. In the next few months, it will be installed on the space station. And we're also releasing the interfaces of this printer so that other groups and NASA themselves can start designing future add-ons for this capability. But the important part is that once the AMF, as we call it, is installed on the space station, everybody in this room, everybody in the world will have the ability to put hardware in space just as quickly as Butch got his ratchet. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, and as a reminder to everyone, we do have people in the aisles collecting questions, so raise your hand to get their attention, and they will bring your questions up to us to ask the panelists. So in the meantime, while we are waiting for the questions, I have one question to the whole panel. What was the most important thing that you learned from your space station project, Jean?
Well, what I've learned through camera missions is how influential the space program is. When I'm showing the video images from space to people, their eyes are shining. I guess you guys have been through the same experience. So my hope is, my personal mission is to keep people attracted by space exploration. Thanks.
Nice. Luis?
If I had to say one single thing, I'd say it's the importance and the benefits of leaving one's zone of comfort. So we're all used to doing a set of things, and we're pretty good at a couple of things, and there might be things that we want to do, we would like to do, but we think, this is my zone of comfort, I'm pretty good at this, I'll let it go. But if you actually push yourself to go beyond your zone of comfort, it opens so many doors. At least in my case, I would have never imagined to be here among these amazing panelists and this auditorium, or having conducted space experiments. Never imagined it.
Excellent. And Norah?
I think I would have to say that the journey sometimes we imagine in our head is often a lot scarier than the journey in reality. And it's okay to come up against barriers and obstacles as long as you keep going and keep aiming towards that goal that you've set out on achieving. So I suppose the biggest lesson is just not lose sight of what you're trying to achieve, and don't be afraid. Just make that choice and keep going.
Julia?
So being part of the Rapid Scat team was provided a good reminder of how relevant, innovative, and dynamic of a system that we have up there. You know, new payloads are going up every month, it seems, both science experiments and ways to test new technologies, like in Jason's case. And so it's just a good reminder of how relevant this is to humankind here on the Earth, but also in going forward.
Definitely. And Jean-Dominique?
For me, it's the importance of the I in ISS. The international component is so strong, because I work with great teams coming from the backcountry of Hungary and great teams coming from downtown Los Angeles, and it's so amazing to see the drive that these people have. It's really the same, like they run through the same issues, and they do that for their inner child or for their country, and when they manage to finally put a little brick on the station, they have the same glitter in their eyes. And the station in the end looks like some kind of upper house for mankind on which everybody wants to put a little brick. And it seems like wherever you go, people have this little seed in themselves that pushes for going off Earth. And I'm only talking about the people that actually had a chance to do something on a station, but imagine that most people may be like that. And I really strongly encourage you actually to submit projects to the station, because it's a great way to learn how to do larger scale space projects, and I would be glad to take care of you in that case.
Absolutely. And Jason?
So probably one of my favorite things that I learned over the experience of the 3D print program was how much NASA cares about working with industry and the private sector. To the point where this mission actually was a Made in Space NASA working completely together. It wasn't NASA asking Made in Space to do something that we went off and did. We actually, as a joint team, did the entire mission. And I think that if we can use that model more and more as we explore space, it'll only strengthen and allow us to move faster.
We have some questions from the audience. The first one is for Norah. What was the most impressive thing you saw a high school student do on the project?
That's quite a tricky question, because I think throughout the project I was fortunate enough to work with many talented students. So I guess ideally I would have been able to raise a lot more money and fund a lot more projects to go, but I think as a first off, it was great to get that first one up there. But as I say, we have a very talented pool of students in Ireland, so I'm really looking forward to getting the first Irish astronaut. Hopefully it's me, but if it's not, hopefully we get the first Irish astronaut up there in the coming years, and I think there's huge potential there, so watch this space.
Nice. And I have a question for Jason. Are Made in Space looking into developing 3D printed solar panels, stepper motors, or EM drives?
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty good question. So in terms of for space exploration, the way we've seen it as when we started the company was this motto that one day everything in space will be made in space. What we really believe in is that for space exploration to not be like the camping trip that I talked about, we need a Earth-independent form of exploration, one where astronauts can go to Mars and live there and not have to depend on a resupply mission to keep them alive. So I think without a doubt we need to start developing more advanced 3D printing technologies and more than just 3D printing, advanced manufacturing, so that we have the ability to, what I say, live off the land. Kind of an American saying, but to utilize your resources there and allow that to keep you living.
Luis, tell us a little bit more about drug discovery. How has microgravity research helped in developing new medications, and in particular, have there been any studies on viruses?
Thank you. So yes, because in space there's, microgravity environment is great for drug discovery, for example, for vaccine development, because bacterial virulence, or their capability to cause disease, is increased. Then you can find the genes that make bacteria virulent, and then you can make mutants that trigger the human immune system to react, but not trigger it bad enough that it causes disease, and that's the principle behind a vaccine. And also in the drug development part. For example, we have helped a pharmaceutical company called Amgen at Bioserve, together with NASA Ames and other partners, in testing molecules that they were thinking that could work against osteoporosis. So for example, postmenopausal women that has untreated osteoporosis can lose 1.5% of bone mass loss. In space, if you don't do any kind of workout, you can lose 1.7% per month, and in the weight-bearing bones like the hip and femur. So what we did was we flew mice, and half of them were untreated, and the other half we gave them this molecule that the pharmaceutical company was interested on. By the end of the experiment, the mice that were treated had higher bone density than the ones that were untreated, but also than the ones that stayed on Earth. And we have done similar experiments on STS-135 and 118 for other drugs like muscle dystrophy, other problems like muscle dystrophy, and another drug for osteoporosis, but also for hepatitis C. And right now we're working on one that is see if we can repurpose a drug against hepatitis C to work against cancer tumors.
Nice. And Jun, I have a question for you. So what are the values of doing Earth observation from the ISS instead of from uncrewed systems?
Okay, that's a problem. We cannot move around as we want, and resolution is lower than the satellite's camera, and also we cannot shoot the ground on the cloudy day. But interestingly, there's a need. One day I got an emergency request to shoot the floody area in the Southeast Asia, and we performed an emergency observation. And some Japanese meteorologists said our images could be used for supplementally to the satellite's cameras, and I think it works.
So Jean-Dominique, as the ISS ages, how does this affect your integration analyses?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
As the ISS ages, as it gets older.
As an ISS agent, yes. The question?
How does that affect integration?
To be an ISS agent? Oh, as an agency that...
As it gets older, gets more mechanical stress, as parts start wearing out, how does that affect your job?
Sorry, I'm...
How does it affect the engineering analysis for future integration of payloads because the equipment is older and the mechanical structure is older?
Oh, right. Okay, I get it. So, yeah, it's a very good point. It may feel a bit as a drawback for people, but we have like a, we of course we work with equipment, space qualified equipment, which has to be very, very safe and reliable. So it's not the state of the art. And we are really concerned about safety, so our requirements are very, very high. And in the past, we put a lot of constraints on the payload developers. Especially, that was really hard for like small universities or small companies that had to fulfill all this really, really high stringent thing that were designed for another age. But we took note of that about a year ago or two, and now we are really, really changing the way we work to make it really as simple as possible for people to integrate their payloads. And so we are adapting the requirements. We try to upgrade the infrastructure. It's not easy because it has to be agreed with all the international partners. But ultimately we will get there. So it's not easy.
All right, and I have a question for Julia. So you mentioned that the ISS orbit is particular. So what effect does the station's non-sun synchronous orbit have on the data that RapidScat collects?
So in short, it lets us look at one particular spot of the ocean at different times of the day. So what I'm learning from the scientists on the team is that that's called the diurnal cycles of the winds. So if you have experience thinking of when you go out and are at the beach, if it's the wee hours of the morning, the winds are a lot calmer, and then they pick up later in the day. So it just lets the science community study how those changes are occurring.
So we are coming close to the end of the plenary. We wanted to ask just a couple of wrap-up questions, and I'm sorry for those of you that we weren't able to get to your questions. There were a lot of good ones sent forward. So first, we have to ask Julia and Jean-Dominique, did you actually meet each other and work together early during the development of this instrument?
Yes, actually, it's quite interesting that although both our teams were like an ocean apart, we managed to work almost like if we were next door because we got really excited on this really exciting project with a really tight deadline. And I remember the nice Californians waking up at 5 a.m. in the morning to try to pick a call with us to solve urgent issues. And we went as far as building a replica of the Columbus interface in the US so that it would be easier for them to do that testing. Because if they would have come to Europe, they would have had to run into a hell of export control regulations. So it really shows the commitment that we can have on such exciting transnational projects. But maybe you want to say something?
Yeah, well, I'll just add that, so I always get the question of why is it called RapidScat, and it is rapid. It's a little bit of a pun because it follows a previous scatterometer called QuickScat. But it was rapid too because it went from a project to actually collecting the data that I was showing in the pictures in under 2.5 years. And these were all new interfaces that we were dealing with the European Columbus module and the SpaceX Dragon. So our teams were in constant communication. We had a lot of systems engineers on our side calling Jean-Dominique and his team almost on a daily basis, I think. And I was providing a lot of the data to the systems engineer that they then passed on. But we got to just meet in person here for the first time, but it was really fun having that connection.
Thanks. We have one last question for all of you. You've had a great experience on the International Space Station, and you've done great work. But what do you envision as the future beyond space station?
Well, what I envision for the future is IAC on the moon. And for the future exploration, the radiation protection is the key. In order to minimize the exposure risk, we need to establish a precise radiation simulation model and keep updating that. So, radiation protection, that's my future work.
If I had to choose, I'd say the moon, but I really want to go there personally. But regardless of what destination it is, I just hope that science continues coming along with our technology expansion, and not only for the benefits of space exploration itself, but also that we can translate the knowledge that we're gaining through that exploration back to all of us here on Earth.
I think we'll see a lot more international collaboration, new countries really reaping the benefits of space exploration, and also what's happening on the ISS now. And yeah, I think it's going to be hugely exciting, and hopefully we'll get many more young people around the world involved the next couple of years, because they'll obviously be the future when all this future space exploration is happening. So
I think there's going to be a lot of parallel paths happening, right? We'll go to the moon, but of course, I'm all for going to Mars. And that's not just because I work at JPL, but I look forward to the day we see someone walking on Mars. But at the same time, we have a lot to learn about our planet. And so just in keeping with the theme of thinking about the ISS, I think the ISS will be this platform where we can continue observing our own Earth and learning about it and how it works for future generations. But we can also use it to test out these new technologies for going deeper into the solar system.
For me, I see a really interesting paradigm shift. That, you know, in the past, there was space and military technology that was driving advances in commercial technology. Like the space brand was a sign of state-of-the-art and quality. But thanks to the internet, thanks to the open innovation policies of companies, thanks to the democratization of knowledge and electronics, commercial technology is actually outpacing space technology. And I think Jason's project is the best example of that. 3D printer in space, it's really amazing. And we are also very happy to buy Google Glass and Sensors Network and iPads for the station. It really helps us a lot. So I really see a very near future where commercial technology will populate the space assets that we build, and it will only make space more familiar to the people, so it will open it up. And talking about the people, I also foresee that a lot of the tasks that the astronauts do today will actually be automated in the future. So if you ever happen to go to space in like 10 or 15 years, I'm sure you'll have a much greater time than the astronauts have today.
So it's my dream that within my lifetime, we move beyond space exploration and into space settlement. Whereas we're exploring space and we're moving deeper and deeper into space, but at the same time, we found ways for humans to live there, and not just on quick there and back trips, but actually settle new places in the solar system. And that's what excites me about the International Space Station, is that it's a test bed for that, and it's where commercial and government are coming together to learn about how to build those technologies. But I think we also need to be thinking about how to inspire the next generation, because they're the ones who are probably going to be the ones to be doing it. And then lastly, that's what gets me excited about IAC every year, is that it's the only place where the entire world comes together to try to solve what, in my mind, is probably the most important problem of our generation to solve, which is how to not just live on one planet.
Absolutely, and it's great hearing the thoughts from our panelists. So this hour has gone by incredibly quickly. We would like to thank you all for participating, and please join us in giving our panelists a great round of applause.